Hi, welcome to our webinar on AI and software development, benefits, risk, and cybersecurity considerations. This is a joint webinar with Prolucid. We have Darcy from Prolucid, the CEO, and Blue Goat Cyber. We have me here today. Trevor's not going to be joining us today. He's on an FDA audit for one of our clients. So I'll go ahead and bring up the slides here. If you have any questions as we go through the presentation, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll address them in real time as much as we can. So I'm going to bring up our presentation and then turn it over to Darcy, who is coming to us from, I can never remember how to pronounce the name of that city you say you're in, Mishawaka or something?
Mississauga.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
Well, that's why we usually say Toronto.
Right, it's a little easier. So let me add it to say the stage here. Okay, cool. So you can kick us off and then we'll go from there.
All right. I'm guessing I'm advancing the slides here as well.
Yeah, I just went to slide 2. Did it advance on your end?
Yes, it did. All right. Well, appreciate you having us on. I think the goal here, we're kind of splitting this conversation into 2 parts. One a little more focused on how we're using AI in not just in product, but also on the development side of things. And to be honest, in every aspect of the business. So looking holistically at that. And then the second part, I think, Christian, you'll take over and really talk more around some of the same things on the cybersecurity side. So I think, if we go back, 6-7 years ago, the AI in general in med devices was a lot more new, but things have progressed a lot. We've got over 1,500 AI-enabled medical devices that have cleared the FDA. There are more that are coming. I think that the thing that's much newer is the impact that agentic AI and these AI tools are having on the actual development process, not just software, but all aspects of how we build these devices and, to be honest, how we run companies. So it's definitely, the momentum is not going to stop. What we're really trying to figure out and hopefully can share a bit on today is how to really do it the right way. There is some hype out there. There is some reality out there. You don't want to be too far along in the hype because you're going to create problems, but you also can't have your head in the sand and think this is not coming because your competitors, everyone else out there is doing this. They're using these tools to really drive productivity. And if you're not, it's going to be tough to compete. So as mentioned, on the AI side, again, as a software company, we're a team of 26. We're doing software commercialization for medtech companies across the world. And we're very, very invested in this. We want to make sure we understand what the right tools are, how to use them the right way, how to train our team on using them so we don't take shortcuts, so that we deliver high quality outputs, but get the benefits that it offers. And as mentioned, touch a little bit on not just within software development, but what we're doing outside of that as well, where these same tools can really help. So I think there's a few foundational pieces that are good, and some of this will be repetitive for those of you that are already doing this. A lot of this all stems from the emergence of LLMs, these large language models that can generate text, they can take prompts, they can, as you add more functionality, expand to do more and more. The second point there around machine learning, this is kind of what we've done in the past. We have lots of medical devices that are already on market. We understand really well how to approach that. Some of the bigger challenges are around getting data collection right, really understanding what data is needed as an input, the demographic you're covering, how you're collecting it, how you're structuring it, having independent labelers that are reviewing it. That's the biggest thing that we see there. But once that's done, it tends to be a pretty straightforward software development process, just like you would do with anything else. With agentic AI and the emergence of that, obviously a lot of new things are happening. One of the things, just to kind of clarify up front, is there is not a path right now on the regulatory side for agentic AI to be part of a medical device. So if you're looking at this from the point of view, I'd like to embed an LLM within my device, don't. So the FDA right now is working, it's over roughly a 3-year project with ARPA-H that's called the Advocate Program. They're looking at a few different areas where LLMs could actually be integrated as part of a medical device. And I think in doing that, try and create the template for how you would get some type of agentic AI through regulatory. But That could be a 3-year process. We'll probably get some guidances along the way. So for right now, this is more focused on how we use these tools to build the product and to make that better, as opposed to within the product itself. So just a couple of sub points on that to break it down. So LLMs are the basis of a lot of this. There's a few different levels of AI that we can talk about. There are AI workflows. These are pretty simple things that we can do in our businesses where, say you've got a CRM and you want to take an output of that, run it through some kind of scripting and steps, do a bit of research to get a better idea of investors that you should meet, or suppliers that you may want to work with, or other research. So there's a lot of AI workflows at its simplest level, and this is not even in development right now, that can be really, really powerful for your business. We've deployed them in all kinds of areas, from sales, marketing, finance, operations, anywhere that we can to take these repetitive tasks and automate. As you build on that, you get into RAG type systems. These are retrieval augmented generation, where these can work well. Picture you've got a lot of QMS documents and you want to be able to search that to find a very specific procedure or process, but without going out to the broader web. So there's a great use case there for them. And then you get into Reacts. These are agents that can start to reason and act all the way through full agentic AI. So just kind of saying the spectrum of what these are, and then looking at how we can use them more on the development side of things. So when it comes to AI coding assistance, I know I covered a few of the other use cases around where we're seeing AI workflows really help with medtech companies in all aspects of the business. On the coding side of things, this is a bit more of a deep dive on that. We kind of break this down into a couple of different ways that we can use these tools to help with coding. One is more chat mode. This is where you've got Visual Studio or your development environment up and running, and then on the screen next to it, you've got ChatGPT or some, one of these LLMs where you can interact with, and you can ask it questions. You can maybe copy a little code snippet in there and get it to give you information. So we still use that. We encourage, obviously, respecting data privacy, and we're not going to upload algorithms or data that's proprietary. But for asking simple questions around environment setup or troubleshooting or debugging, it can be quite useful. The second category is more these embedded coding assistants right within the IDE itself. So internally, we use Copilot quite a lot. There's a couple of different modes that you can operate Copilot in. You can do it in ask mode versus agent mode. And we had a lot of debate, as we were rolling this out, on how do we control this? How do we make sure that people are using it the right way? But we've, rather than trying to restrict access, really focused on the training side. The ask mode is a lot safer. You'll ask it to take a look at a piece of code, and it can maybe complete sections to it. It'll maybe correct it, optimize it, look at specific features. But in each case, it'll present to you, and then you can go in and accept those changes. There's a lot more human in the loop control on that. Whereas with agent mode, you can give it a much bigger task, walk away from your computer, come back a few minutes, depending on the size of the task, maybe longer, and it will have generated a large amount of code. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it creates interesting artifacts, but just understanding kind of the three different mechanisms. That chat mode, it's like someone you can talk to. Ask mode, where it'll do very specific things for you, versus agent mode, where it will go and create as much code as you ask it to. So we touched on this a little bit already, and we'll talk more around the regulatory side. So agentic AI is part of the product itself. Obviously, it's not something that's happening as of yet, not that it won't. But they are, looking at how we can use it. I mean, the FDA is using the agentic AI itself to review submissions and applications. And that's a great use case where a pretty standardized format of what they would see, they can go through and do a lot of that busy work and ideally shorten that timeline for having your submissions reviewed and getting really good feedback. But overall, there are really great guidances around traditional artificial intelligence. They have the predetermined change control plan. Most AI right now is locked, meaning that when you deploy it into the field, it is not going to use the new data to retrain as it goes. So that whole concept of locked is important, but as part of the predetermined change control plan, you can identify how you're going to go about iterating on it. to, as you collect more data under design control, iterate, retrain, redeploy without having to resubmit. So I think there's really great tools around traditional AI. On the agentic AI, it's still coming. And then in terms of the use cases in development, so some of the ones listed here are fantastic. Test case generation, so generating unit tests, it tends to be quite a time-consuming thing. Now, if you use agentic AI to write the code and use agentic AI to test it, and we'll talk more about vibe coding and those things, that can get into a bit of a messy situation where AI is testing AI. But if you've written the code and you want to help with that, generating unit tests that have complete coverage of the overall code, it can do a great job. We still do the merge requests. We do all those reviews because I think it's important. The debugging a tricky situation, you've got something you're not sure, it can be really helpful at getting unblocked. Giving an example of how it could work. And then also early stage proof of concept. If you're just trying to figure out if something might work, this is where the one case where vibe coding is kind of okay. It's really useful at creating something, see if it can work. Maybe you want to try and target a new device with a new protocol. So there are areas where it can really speed up that early development. We just got to make sure we don't cut corners as we get into the real commercial design control phase. So this leads into the misuse of it. And we spend a lot of time internally on this because I think if you can use these tools correctly, they can accelerate development a lot. They can really have so many positive impacts, but there's a lot of ways it can be misused. And I think you hear a lot of the buzz out there right now, a lot of companies that are only using AI to write code. And I'm sure these tools will continue to advance. And as they do, they'll get better and better at it. The concept of vibe coding, though, is literally you give it some commands, it writes some code, and you don't even look at how it's done or what you trust that it was done the right way. You kind of look to make sure it does more or less what you want. But if you think about design controls and what the FDA is looking for, that's not following proper IEC 62304 protocol. So vibe coding
is not suggested in IEC 62304.
It's not right now. I mean, we'll see how good these tools get, but for an early stage prototype, we just want to kind of prove something can work. It can be great. The requirement generation without a human review. One of the areas that we see it oftentimes really fail is on cybersecurity. We'll give it a task in agent mode. It will go and write code. It'll work. It might not be the most performant, but oftentimes it'll have major cybersecurity gaps. And so you'll have to go back and fix that, or it will change a lot of things all at once. So if you don't understand how powerful the tool is and what it's doing, it can get you a spot where you've got code that you don't really understand. And it's not listed on here, but internally, if our juniors use agent mode to write code and they commit it, now seniors have to review it. What we do is we move the bottleneck from juniors and intermediates to the people that have the least time. And they spend a lot of time trying to figure out what was done. So our rule of thumb is whether you've written it all yourself, use chat, use ask mode or agent mode, you need to be able to explain what your code does and why. And if you can't, then you're really just passing the problem on to someone else. And I think that's in a regulated environment, that's very important. You should understand, use these tools to make it better or faster, but really understand what it's done and why. So some of this all does tie back into, again, what FDA and regulators are looking for. The good machine learning practice, the GMLP, it's a great guide. There's great documents out there that talk about how you should do these things. I mentioned earlier around the data collection strategy and eliminating bias from the overall data set. This is probably the biggest challenge that we see. And if you think about why these LLMs they're really struggling with how they would regulate them as part of an actual device, we really don't have control of the data that's being used. Unless you build and train your own model, which is a huge amount of effort, you don't really have control over the data that was used to train it, how it was trained, and it's going to be a lot of bias that's introduced, and that's something that we want to avoid. So just a couple of things there, and then the predetermined change control plans mentioned earlier. This is a great way of allowing you to make your algorithms better, especially on the AI side, without having to go back and resubmit each time. You've got proper design controls around it. You're describing how you're going to collect, how you're going to retrain, how you're going to verify it. make sure it does what's needed, and release it. So there are ways of being iterative and driving the accuracy and the impact, but you have to still do it the right way in order to make sure the regulators are happy.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned earlier is vibe coding, and from first off, I don't like that term vibe coding for some reason, but from our perspective, when we have tested vibe coded applications, they have been full of bugs, full of cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and horribly inefficient code. Like something that could take 12 lines, the vibe code took 120 lines. So it's very inefficient. So it's important with vibe coding to have people look at the code, like you said, Darcy, and not overly rely on it. So that's where those controls need to come into place.
Yep, I completely agree with those, Christian. Our goal is to not to say these tools should not be used. You should learn how to use them the right way, and if you know how to use them the right way and where their limitations are, they can be incredibly powerful. And we invest a lot of time in this, and we see the same. Someone will do some vibe code, throw it over, and say, "Hey, this more or less works," and then it's great. It's a great starting point, but there's a lot of rework that's going to be needed to make it something that can get through FDA and be run in a hospital or a clinic where it needs to work properly and be secure.
Yeah, it's a good way, like you said earlier, to get a real quick proof of concept. But then once you validated it works, you need to actually write the code the proper way in a governed, regulated manner. And we had a question come in here. I'll go ahead and display it up here. It says, use the automation to comment and build test cases. Why not? I think you were saying we should use the automation to help build test cases. Were you, Darcy?
Absolutely. So assuming that you've done, from a development point of view, you follow the proper process, you really understand how the code works. We definitely use AI to help with generating unit tests in particular, as well as documentation from it. Now, we still review the unit tests, we still review the documentation to make sure it's correct, it's accurate, but that's one area where we found a real efficiency in using it.
Cool. Yeah, it's a very good use for it. The second bullet on here about the supply chain input. One of the challenges with vibe coding or using AI to write your code is you don't always know what third-party libraries it's pulling in. And what we found is it will pull in way too many, way more than it should. So now you've got a software bill of materials challenge, and that you don't know exactly what was pulled in there sometimes. So it's a really big challenge, and it pulls in way too many things from our experience. Has that been your experience also?
Yeah, we see the same. It's great at solving the problem. And again, these tools will get better, but right now, great at solving the problem won't always be the most efficient. And when it brings in a lot of open source libraries, we have to make sure that they're the proper open source libraries with the right licensing that we can actually use, because not all of them can be used. And then if you have a CVE, an SBOM list that's now thousands and thousands of lines more than it needs to be, that it oftentimes can move the problem from making development faster into now the architecting and the cybersecurity have a lot more effort. So it's can be perceived as making it faster as opposed to overall, not just development, the overall thing needs to be more efficient.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And then the other aspect here is, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, is from our experience, AI generated code is very sloppily written from a cybersecurity perspective and security control perspective. And it's typically designed to test something, but not to make it secure from our experience. So it's a good use case to do a proof of concept, but you need to really put a lot of security controls around it. And then from a regulated industry perspective, in medtech, we're really focused on patient safety. And this is where I feel like we're still pretty premature for AI development. It still kind of leans towards traditional cybersecurity around data protection, much less than what could the impact of a vulnerability be to a patient if this application was compromised or exploited or had a denial of service?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's one of the, early on when we were using these tools and really leaning into them, that was one of the areas we found to be the weakest was efficient code, but also cybersecurity. And what you can do is, if you have a really strong sense of the architecture, secure architecture as a starting point, you can reference that and have these tools, whether ASP mode or agent mode, look at kind of a best practice design pattern that is secure. And then it will do a much better job of bringing some of those security elements into it, the cybersecurity. But you have to understand, again, you really have to understand the tool, what it's good at, what it's not good at, and how to make it do a better first pass, because otherwise, again, you're kind of solving this one problem quicker, but making the next one worse, because that's not overly helpful.
That's a good way of looking at it. You're solving the initial challenge much faster, but you're actually, if you don't go back and redo things, you're going to make the next hurdle much bigger.
Yeah, you talk to any trade, the drywaller likes the framer. If the framer does a good job, it's easier for the drywaller. If the drywaller does a good job, it's easier for the taper, and then for the painter, and so on. And I think that's a lot of what we see here is if we create a lot of issues at the very beginning by going quickly, it passes it on to the people that come next. And oftentimes they're higher value, maybe more scarce resources that have a bigger burden on them.
Yeah, 100%. Some of the cybersecurity controls we can put in with AI, and it's actually pretty good at doing threat modeling, but we also need to make sure we're modeling threats for the AI itself, such as data poisoning, adversarial inputs, and all the typical threats that are specific to AI. That needs to be part of the threat model. And AI is like decent at generating threat models, but not so much with itself. The training and inference pipelines, we need to look at that as well, just like we need to have a CI/CD pipeline that is secure. The supply chain, we hit upon that a little bit, that if we are using AI, it tends to pull in way too many things from a third-party library perspective, which makes maintaining the SBOMs much more challenging, because now instead of 12 libraries, you've got 120. And instead of like 4 CVs, you have 40. It's a big issue. And then what's important is to have a human in the loop during the development. And where do you put that human in the loop, though? And this is, from a cybersecurity lens, we look at a CI/CD pipeline, and we have gates in there where we should do static application security testing periodically. It's kind of the same concept. If we're going to use AI, we should have a human in the loop to look at the AI code that was written and make some decisions about it before it moves on through the pipeline. And the same, go ahead.
I couldn't agree on that one more. And that's, that merge request process becomes highly valuable. In general, it is a very, very important part of doing good software development for any industry. On the medtech side, it's even more, because during that merge request, that human in the loop, you need to make sure you understand what the code is supposed to do. Is it performant? Have you addressed any safety or just general software risks? Does it have a proper cybersecurity implementation? What libraries are being used? So you're looking at all these things to make sure that whatever does make it in is done correctly. So if we can accelerate some of the other pieces, we just can't skip this. And we also don't want to make this task 10 times bigger than it used to be because of the volume of code that's being thrown at that process.
Yeah, when you were talking about that, I was thinking about the human in the loop that has to look at the code before it's merged. And if the code is 10 times bigger than if a human wrote it, are we actually gaining efficiencies with this AI generated code?
It's sometimes, if done the right way, we've seen it have a real positive impact. It's where you either don't do this step and you create a big problem, or if the people using it to generate the initial code don't really understand what it does and why. That's one of the big things we really challenge is we want you using these tools, but you have to understand what it's doing and why, and be able to explain it. Because if not, again, it's junior and intermediates passing a problem to a senior or an architect, and now they become the bottleneck. So if you do the right foundation pieces, it can drive value, and that human in the loop can still be very efficient.
And then we kind of touched upon having a secure product development framework, a pipeline that has some gates in there to make sure the AI isn't going awry, and it has the right controls in there. We have the human in the loop. That's all part of that secure product development framework. So AI is pretty good with static application security testing. Just like we talked about with development, though, I feel you still need a human in the loop because static application security testing in general throws a lot of false positives. So we want to do our best to eliminate those false positives so we're not wasting people's time. It does help with threat modeling generation to generate the threat models. Again, like any of these things, it'll get you pretty far along, maybe 90%, but you still need someone there, a human, to oversee what the AI is generating because it's not going to be 100% correct. Just like the unit test cases, it can generate cybersecurity test cases and cybersecurity requirements. And it can also help with some of the traceability. Like one of the biggest challenges we have with medical devices and in software development in general is really traceability. So being able to trace a finding to a fix back in the code and have that complete transparency and traceability, and AI can help with that. Of course, anything that can be used for a benefit is often also used for a detriment. AI is misused quite a bit. There are a lot of cybersecurity firms out there that actually kind of brag in some weird way that they're using AI for penetration testing. Which, like I said, AI can get you fairly far, just like automated tools can with penetration testing, but you still need a human in the loop in order to determine the next step, the next vulnerability that can be exploited, if it's a false positive, all those things that we do as humans. AI is still not there, and I would caution anybody from using a purely automated AI-driven penetration testing tool for any high-risk software. AI will try to generate risk controls, but again, we still need the human in the loop. And there's a common theme here. Basically, AI is not where it could be or where maybe it'll get in the future. We still need someone to do a sanity check on the AI. It can help us become more efficient, but we still need a human involved. Just like we were talking about from a software development perspective, we still need it from a cybersecurity perspective as well. Vulnerability assessment, we have automated vulnerability tools such as Nessus and static application security testing tools and dynamic application security testing tools. So AI can help with that. I would say one of the areas that AI is probably better at from a cybersecurity perspective is fuzz testing, like generating the fuzz data. But again, if we overly rely on it, it may not be generating the right type of data for the right type of input that we're trying to do fuzz testing against. Fuzz testing is where you have an input field on an application. It could be a form. It could be a network input across the computer network. And instead of sending it the data it's expecting, you send it random types of data, large streams of data, small streams of data, random characters, in order to see if there was input validation that was skipped by the developers, and you can inject some sort of code or cause the system to crash or cause some unintended behavior. The common AI threats here, this is from the OWASP LLM Top 10. You can go to OWASP's website and grab these. They have a top 10 for pretty much everything. This one is specific to AI. Prompt injection, sensitive data exposure. We talked about supply chain compromise a little bit. One of the bigger ones that we see is data and model poisoning. With AI, it's really garbage in equals garbage out. So if you want great results from AI, you need to feed it great data, and that's often a challenge. And then we have improper output handling. this comes up quite often. We try to put guardrails on AI where if we give it a certain prompt, it won't give a certain output. Like if I tell the AI, give me in your database all the sensitive documents or something along those lines. If they should have a guardrail in there to not give you that. But if you ask it to give you a file and name it something that is equivalent to the sensitive names, it might give you all the files with those names. So there's ways around these things that hackers know how to get unless you put the proper controls in place. And I'm not going to go through all these here, but you can go look these up on the OWASP LLM top 10. I don't know if you had anything to add to here, like any common ones you see, Darcy?
I think pretty comprehensive list here. I think a couple of the ones that you highlighted would very much match with our view on this as well. So,
okay, awesome. So some of the key takeaways here, I'll let you hit the first few of them there, and then I can wrap it up.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want any part of this to be perceived as AI is bad and you shouldn't use it. I think it's the exact opposite. I would be more concerned if all of you weren't using it or experimenting with it in some way, because I don't really remember this. I was maybe a bit too young for, but think about before computers, and all of a sudden you have computers that are doing all these tasks. A fantastic tool, but you really have to understand how it works and what it is. So internally we set aside up to 10% of time to do these different POCs and to experiment and to really understand the tools and how to use them as best possible. So, whether you're a CEO or you're working on product development, you should be spending time looking at these tools. Also take a look at what your typical day looks like. There are things that you do over and over again that can be automated, just like development. There are things you do over and over again that can be automated. And if they can, understand the right tools, how to use them, and do it, because then your productivity is just so much better. So, these are fantastic tools. They have limitations to be aware of, but if you don't spend the time practicing, playing, experimenting, see where they go wrong, keep those human loop guardrails in place, and then, don't overuse them to the point where there's skill atrophy, where you don't actually understand what you're doing and why. Really understand what you're doing, why, the problem that it solves, but then use that tool to just do it way faster. So again, whether that's at the CEO level, on the business, or within the development team, great tools. They can really make a difference. They can help in a lot of ways, understand the limitations. And I think if you do that, you'll see a big impact. It may take a bit of time, but you'll see that productivity really come from it.
I think that's a great point. What you're effectively saying, or if I were to sum it up, is AI is awesome if you use it in the right way to help speed up things, but you have to have a human still involved, and you have to really dial in how you're using that AI, so you're not creating more work for yourself, but you're actually streamlining your process.
Yeah, absolutely. And AGI is a big topic. I'm not sure if it's happened, if it will happen. That's a whole different concept. And then maybe some of the softer skills that we do are replaced. That's probably a topic for another podcast. But where we are right now, I think that's the right way to look at it.
Awesome. Well, we'll stick around to see if anyone has any questions here for a couple minutes. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat, and I'll bring it up here and we can address it. Uh-oh. Melissa has a question. I didn't even know she watched our webinars. The way of the future, is it possible to be good enough to be safe? I'll let you answer that one first, Darcy, then I'll take a stab at it.
I think within the context of, if you understand where the tool is useful, then it can be used safely in that right capacity. It's more, how much can it do before you want that human in the loop to just double check and make sure it's good. And if you think about even in medical devices, We don't, take an imaging device. You're not looking at replacing the radiologist. You're looking to make their life a lot easier. In order for it to get to a point where you no longer need that radiologist, you better be really sure that it's great. So could it get there? It may. What we all do as jobs in 10 years will probably look a lot different than what we're doing right now. And that'll depend on how fast these tools evolve. But I think the message is make sure you understand where good enough is and what is safe right now. And as it evolves, be ready to change, because they will get better.
Yeah, I think the other angle of that is it safer in certain use cases than not using it at all? And I just was on did a podcast recording just a while ago, and I was talking to an AI expert, and one of the things that he brought up was the mental health crisis in the world is bigger than it ever was. It's a major problem, and people can interact with let's say a chat GPT, and ask them certain things about their mental state, for help, for advice, that it's available 24/7. If they interact with a lot, it knows that person way better than a therapist typically, and they don't have to wait in line to see a therapist and don't have to pay any extra money. So is it safe enough to give advice for someone that's suicidal? Probably not. But is it safe enough for the majority of people that have minor depression and want to just get some help? I don't know. From that angle, it probably is, because otherwise, from a stigma perspective, people may not even want to ask anybody else. So it's a different avenue there.
There's just to add on that one. There's also areas where we could use AI, but we lose a bit of the human touch. And Christian, I think yourself, we both go to a lot of events, and there's a lot of work in going and really understanding who's there and which companies would be a great fit for us to meet with. We could automate all of that, show up there and not have any idea who we're talking to and what they do. So some of that exercise of just going through and researching on your own and really understanding. Then when you meet someone in line, you put a face to the name, oh, I know what you guys do. And so that human interaction element, I think there's still areas where, even though it could be automated, we still need to keep it.
Yeah, that was kind of the theme of what we talked about from a development perspective or cybersecurity perspective, or even AI use in a clinical setting. There's still the need for the human in the loop. And I think we're quite a ways away from removing the human. And I'm not sure how successful we'll be at teaching AI empathy and some of the actual human traits as well. We have another question here from Chris Kennedy.
So this is a good question. I can jump in, and then Christian, I think you'll have an answer as well. So what's the level of effort required for a company that started largely with AI assisted kind of vibe coding, but wants to target a regulatory release? So I think from our side, a lot of companies that we see at early stages, whether it's vibe coded or it was done by researchers in a lab, it's usually good enough to kind of demonstrate feasibility to show how they're looking at solving the problem. And so I think this can be a great way of starting. If it allows you to quickly iterate through what could work, what doesn't. And then before you go, because once you go into that commercial journey, you have more overhead and it's going to take more time. So I think whether it's coming from a research lab, whether it's coming from a PhD type project, whether it's coming from vibe coding, they're not all exactly the same, but it more or less proves this can work. Now we're going to go and do it in a very disciplined way, get the proper requirements, use these tools where we can to make that development process as efficient as possible, but ultimately get to the point where it's built correctly and then secured correctly, so that when you go through FDA, it's going to be successful. And when you get to market, it's going to work and not cause harm to patients. So I think it can be a very similar starting point to what we see coming at an early stage from like more of a research grade.
I agree with that. It's a good starting point. I will add one thing that I was discussing earlier this morning as well with somebody was, if you use vibe coding to get your code to that feasibility or minimum viable product to prove that your product will actually meets a need, I think some people have the tendency, there's like a fork in the road. Can I fix the code that AI generated, or do I start over now that I understand this is a viable product with actual requirements and actual governed software development. And from the discussion I had this morning, the answer that this person had, their opinion was, you're going to spend a lot more time and effort and money trying to redo and fix the AI generated code than if you were to just start over with your new requirements in manual software development. What do you think about that other person's answer with that?
I think in general, that's probably the correct answer. Maybe even the programming language they use for vibe coding might not be the performant one that you want for a distributed commercial application. So regardless, though, it can be a really helpful starting point to extract requirements from and guide that process. And ideally, you have figured out what's not going to work before you go and commercialize, because commercializing is a bigger effort. But yeah, a lot of times it would be throwaway. There may be some bits that we can use, but I think still the work done and de-risking things early on is still worth it.
Well, awesome. We'll hang around for another minute or so, see if there's any other questions. We thank everyone for their participation. We have somebody that says they're watching from Zambia, so that's pretty cool. All right, doesn't look like we have any more questions. Thanks, Darcy, for joining Blue Goat Cyber for our Prolucid and Blue Goat Cyber webinar here. It's our first one together. Like you said, I think there's a lot of topics we could cover because software development and cybersecurity and things like AI all jive together. We just had one more question come in, actually. So let me bring this one up here before we head off. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, so really talking about AI and IP from an IP standpoint, I think that this is a good one. I know there's a lot of topics like this we could have dove more into. The way we look at this, something like ChatGPT, where it's an open model, and if you need to look at the terms and conditions for data retention. If you're using free versions of a lot of these tools, they will use all of it for training. If you're using the business versions of some of these, so the more paid levels, then there's more restrictions around what they will and won't do. So one thing we always recommend people look at is, if you're using the free version, do not share anything sensitive at all, because it's now in the public domain. Mm-hmm. And if we're working with a customer and they have a proprietary algorithm that we're working on commercializing, we do not let any of that go towards a ChatGPT or anything externally. When you're looking at Copilot or some of the built-in tools, you have a lot more control over them in that they can run locally. And as a part of your business agreement, you have a lot more control on the data retention that goes around it. But still, you need to understand what all that is, because otherwise, you're right, your IP is now in the public domain. And then I think pulling from third-party libraries, the thing we look at mostly here would be the licensing model on any of them. We want to make sure, because some require you to essentially, any modifications or anything you build on it, you have to commit that all back. And now it's in the public domain. So understanding the right open source libraries to use. And I know we talked to, Agentic AI sometimes will just grab any library because it knows it works, and that may not be the right thing. So you have to understand that side of things as well.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I know there's some, it doesn't happen as much as it used to. There's some third-party libraries that if you integrate it in your source code, there's certain loopholes where they could have you disclose your source code as well, your actual code, right?
Yep.
Awesome. We'll see if we have any other questions. We'll wait for another few seconds here. All right. Well, thanks again, Darcy, and thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks for your participation. And we'll let you know when our next joint webinar is scheduled between Prolucid and Blue Goat Cyber.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on, Christian. And anyone, if they've got questions outside of this, just reach out via LinkedIn, email. Happy to help answer. And I think it's a really important topic. So
awesome. All right, take care.